In the heart of a vast and ancient forest, older than the oldest towns and thicker than any living memory, there stood a crumbling stone castle that rose from the tangled woodland like a jagged, blackened tooth, half devoured by creeping moss, trailing ivy, and the thick shadow of time itself. It was a place seldom approached, for even in the bright hours of morning the forest grew muted within its presence, as though something unseen pressed upon the air, silencing birdsong and sending the smallest animals scurrying wide-eyed into burrows. And it was here that an old woman lived entirely alone, though to call her a woman was to grant her a humanity she had long since shed. For she was a witch of such age and eerie power that no one living remembered a time before her. And though her name was lost or feared or perhaps deliberately forgotten, her presence was woven through every whispered warning spoken in every cottage within a day's ride of the forest. Her habits were known only in fragments, pieced together from the terrified mutterings of hunters who had glimpsed strange shapes gliding past ancient trees. For during the hours of daylight the witch did not remain in her gnarled, human form but slipped into the skin of a sleek black cat, prowling silently along the damp stone corridors with narrow, watchful eyes, or else transformed into a screech owl, gliding on soundless wings past rusted chandeliers and decaying tapestries that told forgotten stories. And only when evening shadows lengthened and darkness reclaimed the forest did she resume her true, crooked shape, thin as winter branches bent like an old door hinge, with a hooked nose sharp as a thorn and eyes glowing faintly, like dying embers hidden beneath ash. The forest creatures were never safe from her hunger. Wolves who normally ruled the night whimpered like pups under her command. Sparrows fluttered helplessly into her waiting grasp, and once she touched them, their fates were sealed, for she killed them without hesitation, boiling or roasting them to sat her endless appetite. Yet her greatest cruelty was directed not at beasts or birds, but at innocent maidens who wandered too close to the castle walls. For anyone, man, woman, beast, or bird who crossed within 100 paces of the castle felt their bodies stiffen, as though roots had burst from the ground and coiled around their feet, trapping them motionless until the witch released them, if she chose to do so. But if the intruder happened to be a young maiden, pure of heart and untouched by wrongdoing, she was met with a fate far worse. With a muttered spell, the witch transformed her into a small, delicate bird, often a nightingale, and placed her in one of the countless wicker cages stored in a secret chamber deep within the castle walls. A chamber lined from floor to ceiling with imprisoned birds that had once been young girls with dreams, families, and futures, now reduced to trembling creatures whose songs echoed with melancholy and loss. And none who entered that room were ever seen again in their true form. Not far from the forest's edge lay a peaceful village surrounded by meadows, wildflowers, and gentle streams that cut silver lines across the land. And in this humble place lived a maiden named Jorinda, whose beauty was spoken of in every home and along every road, though those who loved her most knew that her kindness and purity far outshone even her fair features. And she had pledged her heart to a young man named Joringel, strong of build, thoughtful in manner, and wholly devoted to her, for the two had grown up side by side, their affection blooming naturally like spring blossoms returning each year without fail. And they were betrothed, though not yet wed, living in such gentle happiness that the whole village felt the warmth of it whenever they passed, and their greatest joy was spending time together beneath sunlit skies, speaking softly of the life they longed to build, a cottage near a meadow, children who would run laughing through tall grass, a simple life woven with love, hard work, and companionship. Yet the forest had its warnings Joringel repeated often, for he, like all who lived near the ancient wood, knew the stories of the witch, knew the dangers whispered from parent to child. Never approach the castle, never wander too deep beneath the ancient canopy, never lose your way when the light began to dim. And though he cautioned Jorinda each time they walked near the trees, youth and trust softened the sharp edge of fear, for danger felt distant like a tale meant only to frighten the inexperienced. But one golden evening, bathed in the honeyed glow of a sun drifting toward the horizon, Jorinda and Joringel walked hand in hand at the forest border, breathing the scent of pine and young leaves. And though the world around them was beautiful, a strange heaviness pressed upon their hearts, subtle at first, then deepening as though the forest itself were exhaling some ancient sorrow. And Jorinda, moved by an emotion she couldn't name, sat in a patch of fading sunlight with tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, whispering that it felt as though some shadow had fallen over them, though she knew not why. When they rose to return home, something was wrong. The path had vanished beneath their feet. The forest seemed denser, unfamiliar, the shadows longer and stretched thin like dark fingers, and the sun hung half above the distant hill and half below, casting an eerie half-light through the branches. Then Joringel, peering through a thicket, froze. For closer than he had ever imagined stood the crumbling castle of the witch, its broken walls rising like a grave marker in the gloom. And fear shot through him so sharply his limbs trembled, for every childhood warning rang in his mind at once. He turned to call out to Jorinda, but before he could speak, she began to sing as though compelled by some unseen force, her voice drifting in a haunting melody. My little bird with neck of red sings, he sings that the dove must soon be dead, sing sorrow juke juke. And before his horrified eyes her words faltered, melting into the song of a nightingale, her form shrinking, feathers blossoming where skin had been, her arms dissolving into wings, her face narrowing into a delicate beak, and in mere breaths the maiden he loved was gone, replaced by a trembling nightingale with a soft red mark at her neck. Before Joringel could move, a screech owl burst from the shadows, circling him 3 times with eyes burning like twin coals, its piercing cry slicing the air, and the moment it completed its final circle, Joringel felt his body freeze, locked in place by a spell stronger than chains, and the owl vanished into a thicket, leaving in its place the witch in her true, crooked form. Muttering to herself, she snatched the nightingale Jorinda into her palm and walked toward the castle, ignoring Joringel's silently screaming heart. And only when she returned did she release him with chilling words. Greet thee, Zakel. If the moon shines on the cage, Zakel let him loose at once. And he collapsed to the ground, sobbing, begging her to return Jorinda. But the witch only hissed, You shall never ever have her again, before disappearing. For days, then weeks, Joringel wandered, hollow with grief, sleeping little, eating less, driven only by memories of Jorinda's laughter and the horror of her transformation, until he reached a faraway village and found work tending sheep, drifting through each day like a ghost. Yet deep within him a quiet determination smoldered, a refusal to abandon the maiden he loved. Often he returned to the forest's edge, praying for guidance, for any sign that could help him free her. And at last an answer came when he dreamt of a strange flower, a bloom with deep blood-red petals that glowed faintly, soft as silk yet vibrant as embers, and at its center a pearl-like drop of moonlight that shimmered with quiet power. And in the dream he touched the flower to a stone, and the stone glowed, touched it to a bird cage, and the bars melted, touched it to a nightingale. And she transformed into a maiden, and when he woke, breathless, he knew he had seen truth. He searched for days through valleys, across brooks, beneath tangled branches, overturning stones, sifting through dense undergrowth, until at dawn on the 9th day he saw it, blooming beside a mossy rock as though placed there by fate, the very flower from his dream glowing softly in the morning light. With the precious bloom guarded carefully, he journeyed back to the forest, fear overridden by fierce purpose, and at the castle he touched the door with the flower. The wood burst open like dry grass touched by flame. Inside, quiet but for the flutter of wings, he navigated winding corridors until he reached a chamber where the witch stood feeding her imprisoned birds, her face twisting with fury at the sight of him, shrieking curses and lunging forward, but the flower's magic held her back as if an invisible wall kept her trapped. Joringel rushed among the endless cages, despair threatening to crush him as countless nightingales, each identical, fluttered and cried. For he had no way to know which one was Jorinda, and hope wavered until he saw, from the corner of his eye, the witch creeping toward the exit, clutching a single cage tightly, trying to escape unnoticed. Instinct and love surged through him. He leapt forward and touched the cage with the red flower, its wicker glowing as the spell dissolved with a sigh, and Jorinda stood before him in human form, trembling, weeping, alive, and she flung herself into his arms as he held her with a desperate tenderness. The witch shrieked, but one touch of the flower robbed her of her power, her eyes losing their ember glow, her body sagging as centuries of wicked magic left her all at once. The cages, Rattled, they lived happily ever after.